Hello everybody. I hope everybody is well today and that you enjoyed episode 1 of the Blue Pendant. Today I'm going to read episode 2 of the Blue Pendant. And you may notice that I am very warm with lots of sweaters and things on today. As you know, I'm recording this from Ottawa, Canada, and just to make you feel those of you who are not freezing to death, to make you feel a little warmer, the temperature here at the moment with the wind chill is minus 38 degrees centigrade. And that is cold, even for us. Fortunately, it doesn't last too long, and cuddling down with a nice book is often a good way to get through these really cold spells. So without further ado, I would like to read to you chapter 2 of the Blue Pendant. It's called Papa's Little Girl Grows Up. Sophie Romano flung the bedroom door open and said, "Anna, it's 6 o'clock, time for tea. Quick, or we'll be late." "Don't expect me to keep reminding you. Mrs. Banks only sent me because it's your first day." "Thank you," Anna said, brushing a handkerchief across her wet cheeks. Noticing Sophie Romano had addressed her by her first name, Anna felt herself warming, just a little, towards her new roommate. The grandfather clock chimed the hour. Anna felt each stroke resonate inside her, validating her presence at the Sackville Hotel. There was no turning back. The deafening noise of wooden chairs scraping on the oak floor drowned out all possibility of hearing anyone speak. Not knowing where to sit, Anna looked to Sophie for guidance. She nodded towards an empty chair. "Hey, that's my seat," the young bellboy yelled. Anna jumped up. Sophie grinned and shrugged her shoulders. Mrs. Banks gave her her vexed look, and pointing to the same chair Anna had sat in earlier, she said, "This was Edith's place, and now it is yours, Miss Neal." Anna detected a split second of tension at the mention of Edith's name. The room erupted into clinking cutlery and clanging dishes, interspersed with chatting and laughter. Anna found the noise unsettling. Mealtimes at home were quiet and formal. But not having eaten a full meal since breakfast, she eagerly ate every morsel of the beef and mashed potatoes on her plate. The noise escalated as dishes were cleared away. Mr. Blaine entered from the kitchen, balancing a large tray on his shoulder. The sweet smell of bread pudding and custard wafted towards Anna. Bill placed the tray next to her, giving her a smile and a wink. When the meal was finished, Mrs. Banks invited Anna to her sitting room, where Amy placed a tea tray on a round table draped Victorian style with a rich burgundy cloth, topped with white lace. Anna remembered tiny fair-haired Amy ironing in the laundry room. Anna guessed she was no more than 13 and wondered why she was not attending school. An oversized broom cupboard with a fireplace would aptly describe Mrs. Banks's sitting room. A west-facing window filtered the rays of the setting sun, filling the room with a warm orange glow, and the soft scent of lavender hung in the air. The small wooden clock on the mantelpiece hummed a lyrical tick-tock, tick-tock. Anna relaxed in spite of her nervousness. The cramped space contradicted the capacious sense of comfort and coziness. Mrs. Banks' demeanour mellowed as she lowered herself into a well-worn rocking chair. Sitting opposite, Anna glanced at a small dresser, displaying 3 photos: a formal family gathering, a young man in uniform, perhaps a brother or a beau, and another young girl who could have been young Mrs. Maggs holding a small dog. Several books lined the back of the dresser. Anna recognized titles by Rudyard Kipling, and she immediately felt a kinship to Mrs. Banks. Perhaps she shared her love of adventure. After all, Mr. Kipling did write about far-off places. A thick, well-worn book overpowered the others, Mrs. Beeton's Whole Household Management. It contained every detail about how to organize a household, and she wondered how it would apply to a hotel. Mama called it her Bible and constantly quoted from it. Anna cringed, hoping she would not have to endure such recitations from Mrs. Banks. Miss Neal, as head housekeeper, I am responsible for the discipline and care of all the female staff. In addition to etiquette, which I expect you to be familiar with, there are rules to be followed at all times. I am strict, but fair. As she spoke, her demeanour changed. Anna could have sworn her stays tightened and the bun on her head pulled on its pins. She had Anna's attention. To break these rules may result in dismissal. Mr. Pickles looks after the male staff, and he reports all staff activities directly to the owners, Kendrick Hotels Limited, and is responsible for the overall management of the hotel. His word is final. Mrs. Banks hesitated, cleared her throat, and took a sip of tea before continuing. At times you will be working closely with Mr. Pickles in the office. Your predecessor, Edith, was... She hesitated again, taking another sip of tea. The cup rattled on the saucer. Miss Neal, you will conduct your duties as instructed by Mr. Pickles. She cleared her throat. But should you... Mrs. Banks paused. Find his requests unusual or of a personal nature. The question was left hanging. Anna expected Mrs. Banks to finish the sentence, but instead she rambled on about more rules. Confused and bored, Anna began to fidget. She had a natural aversion to rules. Whether she liked them or not, she felt she had better comply. Have I made everything clear? Do you agree to abide by these rules? Yes, Mrs. Banks. That is all. You will report to Mr. Pickles at 8 o'clock in the morning, in his office by the reception counter. Breakfast is served after 6 and no later than 7. Now off to bed with you and get some rest. We don't want any fainting spells tomorrow. Anna's cheeks flushed. Mrs. Banks smiled. Reluctant to unpack her trunk, Anna stared mindlessly through the attic window. Her gaze fixed below on doll-sized ladies strolling along the promenade under spinning parasols, with gentlemen at their sides. All of them oblivious to Anna's loneliness. Nothing more than ornaments beside the sparkling sea, she thought. She picked out a simple, high-collared white blouse with tight cuffs and just enough fullness in the sleeve to be fashionable, but appropriate for her desk duties. She decided on a dark brown skirt because it cinched her tiny waist, then the hem fashionably above her ankles. Perspiration trickled down Anna's back. The hot, stuffy attic room needed some fresh air. Inspecting the frayed sash cords of the window, she left it closed. She brushed her golden brown curls until they shone, twisting them into one long plait. Gingerly she extended her head into the hallway, looking for the water closet. First she looked to her right. Nothing but a blank wall with a small window. Turning to her left, the long hallway extended like a tunnel, with a speck of light at the other end. She began to tiptoe towards the light, terrified of accidentally stepping into the forbidden men's quarters. Then a terrible thought crossed her mind as she visualized the washstand in the bedroom. Maybe there was no water closet. Would she have to use a chamber pot? She let out an audible groan. Miss Neal, are you all right? Anna's hand flew up to her mouth to muffle her scream. She swung around to see Amy standing at the top of the stairs. Oh, Amy, you gave me such a fright. Anna let out a deep, raspy breath. I was looking for the WC. We do have one, don't we? And Amy giggled. Of course we do. It's a modern hotel. Oh, thank goodness. Could you show me where it is, please? Amy pointed to the door behind her. Feeling foolish, Anna hustled inside, grateful for the privacy. Back in her room, she slipped on a thin nightdress, appreciating the cool cotton on her skin. She pulled the coarse brown blanket off the bed, thankful that she wouldn't need it tonight. I'll send home for a soft blanket once I'm settled, she thought, crawling into the creaky iron bed. Anna woke to an unfamiliar noise. She rolled over to see Miss Romano at the washstand, winding her thick dark hair into a neat bun. Oh, her ladyship is awake. Sophie's deep brown eyes catching Anna in the mirror. What time is it? It isn't hardly daylight, Anna said, choosing to ignore the sarcasm. 5 o'clock. I have to help Amy get the maids up. The younger parlour maids can be lazy, she said, rolling her eyes. There is much work to accomplish in the salons. The dining room has to be spotless before the early rising guests come down for breakfast. What time did you finish last night? I didn't hear you come in. Usual, about 11 o'clock. Make the most of your first night. From now on you'll be working morning to night. That should take away some of those airs and graces. In spite of her resolve not to pout, Anna's bottom lip trembled. I don't have airs and graces. I have a different position from you, with different hours. Pulling on her black dress, tying the white apron around her tiny waist, and carefully pinning her lace cap on her head, Sophie giggled and turned to the door. Pride comes before a fall, your ladyship. She bobbed a pretend curtsy. And don't get too settled. I intend to get my room back. The razor-sharp words rang in Anna's ear as she made her way to the staff dining hall for breakfast. The service stairs were teeming with activity. Maids carrying trays of morning teas, parlour maids with carpet sweepers and feather dusters, porters and footmen with silver candelabras and brass coal scuttles, valets with jackets and trousers, and ladies' maids with gowns flung over their arms. Anna stepped to the side, pressing her back against the banister, allowing a beautiful crimson gown to pass. Still staring at the gown, she didn't see Amy hidden behind an enormous laundry basket. They collided mid-stair. The content of the basket tumbled down the stairs. Watch it, a familiar voice yelled. Carter was helping Amy gather up the linen. Oh, morning, Miss Neal. Best get out of the way. Anna quickly moved downstairs, fiddling with the cuff of her blouse. She stood in the doorway, deciding whether or not she should enter the staff dining hall. Mr. Blaine's soft whisper in her ear, sending a shiver of pleasure down her spine. Miss Neal, try to look busy. He gave her a cheeky grin as he placed a large tray of eggs and ham and steaming porridge on the Welsh dresser. As you can see, mornings are extremely busy. Give me a hand and set the dishes out for the staff breakfast. The plates are stored in the Welsh dresser. It will impress Mrs. Banks. Anna placed the plates on the table just as Mrs. Banks entered. She nodded her approval. Mr. Blaine, are we ready for breakfast? Yes, Mrs. Banks. Miss Neal is finishing the table. Giving Anna the now familiar wink, Mr. Blaine went back to the kitchen as the rest of the staff came in for breakfast. Mr. Pickles' office had a gentleman's smell to it, the sweet, lingering aroma of cigars with the sharpness of a spirit, probably brandy, mixed with the muskiness of leather on wood. Papa's study smelt like this, she thought. It was strange to be in a room without windows. Some natural light filtered in from the lobby, but most of the light came from the electric wall sconces and table lamps, casting menacing shadows around the room. Have a seat, Miss Neal. Mr. Pickles indicated an overstuffed leather chair. He walked behind the large, highly polished mahogany desk and took his place opposite Anna. The bulky chair engulfed her, Uneasiness gripped her as the oversized chair held her captive. She thought she might suffocate. Remembering the embarrassing fainting spell, she immediately sat up straight and looked directly at Mr. Pickles. He looked taller and sharper today. His monk-style bald head had been carefully barbed, leaving one side long enough to comb over the barren patch in the centre. She had a sudden urge to giggle, imagining the wind blowing the long strands of hair above his head, giving him a rooster look. As though Mr. Pickles could read her thoughts, his hand went up to his head, smoothing his comb-over. She quickly averted her gaze to a wall of bookshelves. "Are you interested in reading?" he asked. "Yes, very much, Mr. Pickles." "Huh!" Not knowing if the response was meant to convey approval or disapproval, Anna continued, "I'm quite taken with Mr. Rudyard Kipling's writing. Uncle Bertie, with whom you are acquainted, gave me—" Anna stopped. The electric light threw sinister shadows across his pointy face. Red spots erupted on his neck. Like a panther stalking prey, he leaned forward, his long, skinny body stretching across the desk, his hot breath wafting on her cheeks. She feared his long pointed nose might impale her into the chair. "Miss Neal, you are here to work, not read, and you will refrain from any reference to my acquaintance with your uncle. You may be here as a favour to your uncle, but that does not mean you will be treated with favouritism. Bertie mentioned you were high-spirited and too intelligent for a woman. Too much spirit and intelligence is unbecoming." He scoffed. "I expected you to do your job and do it well, or you will be dismissed. Do you understand?" Now towering over the desk, his hands left steamy prints on the polished desktop. As he pushed himself back to his chair, his ferret eyes pierced into Anna. She gulped, not daring to move or speak. Tears burned at the back of her eyes, hurt by Uncle Bertie's betrayal, calling her too intelligent for a woman. The words would not leave her head. The tears grew closer to the surface. Mr. Pickles' voice began sliding into the background when suddenly he lurched forward across the desk and a burst of hot breath hit her face. "Pay attention, Miss Neal." Pushing her thoughts and tears deep inside, she sat up as straight as the chair would allow. "Yes, Mr. Pickles." Forcing herself to focus, Anna listened to Mr. Pickles review hotel protocol and describe her duties. She was not to be the hotel's front desk clerk, as Uncle Bertie had implied. Her main duties were as Mr. Pickles' secretary, typing shorthand and operating the telephone. Mr. Linton, whom she hadn't met because he lived out, was the front desk clerk. Anna's front desk duties would be limited to early mornings, late evenings, and Sundays. Struggling to stifle her emotion, she shifted in the chair. A muffled knock on the door caught her attention. Mr. Pickles pulled out his gold chain and fob, flipped open the watch, grunted and said, "Enter." "Good morning, Mr. Pickles." A short, portly young man, dressed in a grey pinstripe suit, entered the room. He looked shiny. His black, overly greased hair shone as glossy as his black patent shoes. "You are precisely 1 minute late, Mr. Litton." "Yes, sir, my apologies." Unperturbed, he bowed to Mr. Pickles and looked over at Anna, who was now standing. "Miss Neal, may I present Mr. Litton, our front desk clerk? He will instruct you on all matters related to the front desk and the operation of the telephone exchange." Consulting his watch, he added, "At precisely 1400 hours you will report back here. Dismissed." "Yes, sir," replied Mr. Linton, who looked at Anna to do the same. Anna managed a weak "Yes, sir," while trying to determine what time 1400 hours would be in regular time. Standing at the front desk, out of Mr. Pickles' hearing range, Mr. Litton said, "He was a sea captain. He still thinks he's at sea, and he treats us like his crew." There are days when I half expect him to come in with a parrot on his shoulder. I'm tempted to respond with, "Aye, aye, sir." A wide grin framed the lower portion of his round, jovial face, and his contagious laugh passed easily to Anna, releasing the tension of the last hour. "Oh, 1400 hours translates into 2 in the afternoon. Now, Miss Neal, let's get to work." A large, tiered crystal chandelier hung in the centre of the opulent hotel lobby. Each crystal reflected prisms of coloured lights on the walls and polished brass fittings. The hotel register, a large tan leather-bound book, lay prominently on the polished mahogany reception counter. An elegant silver pen with matching inkwell sat at the side. Anna sensed the grandeur and prestige through her fingers as they moved over the soft leather and the gold embossed hotel crest in the centre. Each page was etched with the same gold. A wall of mahogany cubbyholes hung behind the reception counter. Each numbered cubbyhole held the corresponding guest room key, plus any messages or letters waiting for absent guests. Anna picked up the registration procedure quickly. She found it quite exhilarating to speak with the guests as they registered, but she failed dismally with the telephone exchange. She constantly plugged in the wrong telephone lines, upsetting the guests as they answered strange calls or found no connection. Mr. Litton's patience was running thin, and his quick temper, a side that Anna had not yet experienced, was about to explode. The perspiration beaded under her hair, making her curls tighten and her fingers sticky. Her nerves were getting the better of her. The complicated telephone exchange was like training an octopus. "This is impossible," she thought, as the plug slipped in her sticky fingers and landed on the board on the wrong hole. A gruff voice said, "The salmon's good today, Bill. Should please the toffs. How much does you want?" Horrified, Anna heard a refined voice answer, "Do you know who you're speaking to, young man? This is Lady Thornton. Now to get off my telephone line immediately." A loud laugh came from the confused fishmonger. Stunned, Anna stared at the exchange board, trying to figure out what to do. Mr. Litton snatched the plug from the offending sockets and slammed them in front of Anna. His jovial disposition snapped. "You stupid girl!" he exploded, his face turned from red to purple. "Move away from the telephone exchange this minute. I shall be obligated to report your conduct to Mr. Pickles." He continued to berate Anna, having forgotten he was in a very public hotel lobby. Anna ran to the staff quarters, banging the door. She kept running down the passageway until a blur of white and a pair of strong arms caught her. No longer able to contain her pent-up tears, they released in torrents. "Hey, what happened?" a soft male voice whispered. Anna looked up to see a pair of brilliant azure blue eyes staring at her. "Mr. Blaine, I am..." Taking a quick breath, she blurted out, "I don't know what to do. I'm going to be dismissed." Bill Blaine led her down the hallway through the back door into the courtyard. She sat on the bench, grateful for the fresh air. He pulled a packet of woodbines from his pocket. "Smoke?" No, thank you." He lit a cigarette, took a long drag, and exhaled slowly. "So what upset you so? You only just arrived, so I doubt they'll dismiss you." Anna explained about her frightening meeting with Mr. Pickles, how Sophie hated her, and her difficulty with the telephone exchange, and the final straw when Mr. Litton lost his temper. He listened attentively, but the amused curve on his lips was not the reaction she expected. "Now I understand," he responded, smiling. "I was ordering salmon this morning, and Harry, he's the fishmonger, kept talking about being connected to Lady Thornton." His smile turned to a hearty laugh. No longer offended, Anna smiled, seeing the funny side of the situation. "Anna? May I call you Anna?" She nodded. My advice is to go and freshen up, have some luncheon, and apologize to Mr. Litton. Anna, I have to go. Chef will be looking for me. Oh, the name is Bill. But he should not have said those things in front of the guests, Anna pouted. Perhaps you are right, but he reports to old Prickly Pickles. You did make a mistake. Mr. Litton takes his duties seriously. Upsetting an important guest of Lady Thornton's stature is a serious offence. And he is your senior. I suppose you're right, Anna conceded. Be humble, Anna. You're no longer Papa's little girl. We'll talk later. How dare you? Ignoring her, Bill stubbed out his cigarette and walked through the back door. Papa's little girl, indeed. He doesn't even know me. Deep inside, she knew Bill was right. If she didn't mend her ways, she would face dismissal, and it had nothing to do with the telephone exchange, although she would have to apply herself in order to operate the stupid thing. First she tidied her hair, and taking Bill's advice, she went to meet Mr. Litton. Mr. Litton, I am most terribly sorry for upsetting Lady Thornton and for causing you such distress. Anna bowed her head. I don't know what came over me. I'm sorry I ran off. Staring at her shoes, she waited for his response. She shuffled her feet slightly, hoping it would shake off the feeling of awkwardness. Being humble did not come naturally to Aunt Hannah. The incident with Lady Thornton should not have happened. It is my responsibility to make sure that all our guests receive excellent service. When that doesn't happen, it reflects upon my abilities as front desk clerk. I have spoken with Lady Thornton and explained that today was your first day. She has graciously accepted my apology. You should not have run off banging the door. That was most unbecoming of a young lady and quite unacceptable in the Sackville Hotel. But I do concede that I acted a little harshly. I accept your apology, he smiled. Mr. Pickles does not need to know about this. Thank you, Anna said, feeling as though she had just dodged a bullet and matured 10 years. I understand this is your first day. Mr. Litton smiled. Anna matched his smile. Gather your sensibilities and be ready to report to Mr. Pickles at 1400 hours. Anna could hardly feel her feet touch the ground as she walked to the staff dining room. She wasn't going to be dismissed, and the awkwardness had disappeared. She felt different, more confident, and she liked the feeling. Striding into the staff dining room, she helped herself to some cold mutton, fresh bread, and a hot cup of tea. She was still annoyed by Bill's comment, but he had invited her to call him Bill. His unusual eyes, fair hair, and kind smile appealed to her. Pulling her shoulders to her neck, she could still feel the warmth of his strong arms. She dismissed the thought of romance. The Sackville was to be an opportunity for adventure. Deep in thought, the quarter-hour chimes startled her. Only 15 minutes before presenting herself to Mr. Pickles. And that is the end of episode 2. So stay tuned for episode 3, and I hope you enjoyed it. Thank you. Bye.